Alright, hello and welcome to this video. I'm just going over the concepts of, discovering your own chords within a key, right? Within a key. So if you're in a major key, obviously we could be in a minor key, but every minor key has a corresponding major key. So let's just talk about the major key, whatever major key we're talking about, and just starting off with a simple key, right? We got the key of C major. C major starting from a C note, which is on the 8th fret. 8th fret, right, of the E string here. So it starts your C note, right? It's a C. Then it goes D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, right? So it starts over, it goes through 2 octaves in the key of C major. So, and then if you also understand that from that first mode of the key of C, it's called Ionian mode, right? We can also build our first major chord of that key of C, which is C major, right? C major. So you can imagine if you're able to start, getting more of the chord structure that goes within a key, so you can find and discover and make your own chords at any time, depending on the color of the chord or the rhythm you're trying to create, whatever it is, right? And then also even making the melodies and harmonies that can go within. But let's just say we go right there and play, that from that C note, right? Play C Ionian. If you don't know Ionian, you want to learn that. It's a first mode of a major key, right? But also you can play from that C note, you can play a C bar chord right here, right? Maybe you already know what a major bar chord typically looks like with using this string as the bass note, right? So it's C major on this 8th fret, right? C major, which is the same chord as an open C. It's made of 3 notes, right? It's made of the C, the E, and the G note, which are all 3 notes in the key of C major, right? And they happen to be the 1st, 3rd, and 5th notes in the key of C major, right? So, like I was going through the scale here, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, that's 1 octave, right? And then D, E, F, G, A, B, C, that's a 2nd octave, right? But in each of those octaves, right, each note represents a degree. The 1st degree in the key of C being the C note, the 2nd degree being that D note, right, the 3rd degree being E, right, the 4th degree being F, and the 5th degree being G, and then 6th is, A, starts over at A again, right, and then the 7th note being B, and then the 8th note, or the 1st note of the next octave being C again, right, C, which we can see ironically, that is the same as this note up here, just an octave higher, right? These two are, you see there's only 1 fret between them, but the E string and the D string, or the 1st and the 3rd string, 1 fret between them, that's always the same note. In this case, it's C. Now, if we move this up 1 note, that's C sharp. This up 1 note, that's also C sharp, right? Same thing with D. E flat, those are both E flat. E up here on the 12th fret, right here, 14th fret down here, both E notes, right? So once again, going back to C, we can see we did an octave there, right? So that 1st, 3rd, and 5th note out of that key of C make a C major chord, right? So once again, that's C, and then skipping the 2nd note, which is D, we go to the 3rd note, which is E, right? And then skip the 4th note, which is F, and go to the 5th note, which is G. So we notice that C, E, and G, right? The 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of the key of C major, right? So maybe now you can get a better grip on how the key structure works, how a major chord is made from that key, right? So key of C. Now we can, instead of playing C, D, E down here, we can play C, D, and E over here, play that same E note, which is over here, just like when we tune a guitar to the 5th fret. Maybe you're familiar with that, the A note down here, we tune these 2 strings together. Same thing over here, this is the E note, this is also an E note, right? So C, E being the 3rd note in the key of C, right? C, E, and G, right? So you can play it that way too. Either way, using an E note in there. Either way, right? But the bottom line is using the 1st, 3rd, and the 5th note out of that key to make the major chord, the first major chord. So that means that this chord has to be nothing but C's, E's, and G notes. So if that makes sense, this first note right here, of course, is the C note, like we just talked about. The second note is a G note, which happens to be the fifth note in the key. So we don't necessarily play 1, 3 in all sequence necessarily. It's just any combination of those 3 degrees of the key, right? Any combination of C, E, and G. But in order to really be a C chord, it really needs to have the C as the bass note, the lowest note in that chord. So this is a form of C, in this case, like I said, C major, right? So the first, fifth note, and then we have a C again, so that's the first note again, right? So 1, 5, and 1. Right down here we have the E, right, which is the same as this E up here, or this one up here, right? So that's that's your third note in the key of C, right? So C, once again, right? G, C, E, right? This one down here is a G, which is the same as this third fret down here in this string. It's a G as well, just like when you tune the guitar, but a couple frets up. So, and then back and down the last string, we got C note again, which makes sense because these are both E strings, right? So these are going to both be C notes, just like these are both E notes, right? So that's 2 octaves away from each other because we went through 2 octaves once again. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Going through 2 octaves, playing nothing but 1s, 3s, and 5s out of the key of C. We're able to make this first C major chord. Right? So if we understand that, right, so basically we can see that we're taking notes out of that key to make this chord. And that's the same way it is with basically any other chord that you'll make for the key of C. Right? Now, don't get me wrong, there's certain kinds of styles and passing notes and chromatics and stuff that you can play in certain scenarios. But for the most part, playing in the key of C, you're going to be playing chords that all have notes from the key of C major, right? So once you got the C major chord, right? Now, if we were to go to the next note in the key of C, which is the second note, which is not the third note, but the second note in the key of C, going from C to D, right? There's a chord that corresponds to D, but stays in the key of C, right? And in that case, it's what we call D minor, right? D minor, which is just like when we play the C major over here. You can see we got this one note represents the third note of the key of C, which happens to be E, right? And that E, if we wanted to make this a minor chord, we would flatten that third note, right? From E to E flat. That would make it a C minor. So we do the same thing with the D major chord, 2 frets up on the D note here. We make a D major chord, the same position, same fingering as a C major, right? Just 2 frets up. But then we take off that 1/3 note of the key of D in this case, because we're talking from a D chord. Right? It's the first, third, and fifth note from a key of D to make the D chord, right? D major. But we're taking the third note and we're flattening it by a 1 fret and making what we call a flattened third, just like we did with the C chord to make it minor. We're making the D minor by taking that 1 fret and just letting it be down where it's barred, right? 1 fret down, so making it D minor. And it has to be D minor to stay in the key of C major, right? To correspond or work in the key of C major. So whenever we're playing a D chord in the key of C major, it has to be a derivative of the D minor, right? So it has to have a flattened third typically, right? No, I'm not saying there's never any kind of scenario that could go outside of the box of the Western musical modes, generally speaking. But like I'm talking about, staying in the key of C, right? Maybe you want to go up to a D chord. We're going to make it a minor chord, right? Kind of makes sense, right? The next note in the key of C, the third note, like we were using, which is the E note, right? We were using that to make, part of the C chord. But when we go out to the E note and play an E chord in the key of C, it also has to be minor, right? So in order for all these notes to go up 1 note in the key of C major, they end up being an E minor, right? So that's what we're doing. We're going from C major here, we're moving up every one of these notes up one note in the key of C major. And they don't just go up linearly, like this one only goes up a half a fret instead of a whole fret to stay major, right? So it goes up like a half a fret on this one string. So we move, this one string. So we move it up, it's only going to go up to this note instead of this note, and that means the D is going to end up being minor, right? So same thing with the third chord, which is E. It's also going to be minor, right? So the simple way to put this is there's 7 notes in a key, right? And then it starts out at the first note of the next octave, which could be considered the 8th note of the first octave, right? Like I said, going from C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, which is this 8th note of this first octave, starting at C again. But it's also the first note of the second octave, right? So then, if that makes sense. So what we're doing there is we're starting out, we're playing a chord for each one of the notes in the octave. So if we're talking about the key of C major, right, it has an octave going from C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. There's no sharps or flats in the key of C if you're aware of that, right? But what we're doing is playing a chord that corresponds to each note in that key of C major, right? So when we play that chord, it has to be a derivative of the chord that would stay in the key of C. So the simple way to remember that is there's, like I said, 8 notes in an octave. Really 7 unique notes. Completely unique notes, and then the 8th note is basically an octave higher, or the first note is still kind of the same note. It's a C note in this case, right? So when we move up to that, each note, we're going to make a chord that corresponds with each note that still fits in the key of C major. And like I said, the simplest way to remember that is the first, fourth, and the 5th note will be major chords, right? The 2nd, 3rd, and 6th note will be minor chords, right? So like we're talking about the key of C once again. Key of C major, right? The first chord's major, of course, because it's the key of C major, right? And we said the 1st, 4th, and 5th are major, right? So the 2nd and 3rd are minor. So going from the first chord, C major, to D minor, to E minor, and then to F major. I can't really play it up here very easily. It's hard to play from here. But that's the 4th chord in the key of C major, right? F major, right? And then it goes up to the 5th chord in the key of C major, which would be G major. It's very hard to play right here, but I can play the first few, right? So, not the best key to show you where I can play all the way up the neck, but you can see, like you said, I just showed you 6 chords in the key, right? The 1st, 4th, and 5th are going to be major. The 2nd, 3rd, and 6th are going to be minor. Well, what about the 7th chord, right? Before you start the octave again. The 7th chord is what we call a minor 7 flat 5, right? So once again, you're moving every note up one note in the key of C to get to that 7th chord. It happens to be a minor 7 flat 5, or an augmented chord. I can't remember, there's a couple ways to say it. And it's kind of an unusual chord, right? So if I coming back over here to the key of, let's say, C and C major chord right here, basically I'm playing up an octave, and then we're going to get to a C chord again. And the C chord is just an octave up from this C chord. So everything is just the same up here. It's just an octave higher, right? So if I was to go to the 7th chord here, it would be right before the C chord that I would make, which is very hard to make over here. So just for that sake, we're moving it back over here to say, hey, we're playing up to the C chord, just like we would do up here, playing up to the C chord, right? So the fingering is going to be the same. So if you can imagine that you're playing the C major chord, if we were to go back to the 7th note in the key of C major, it's just a half step, or a 1 fret behind the C note. In this case, it's a B, right? So it's a B and then C, right? So C, the 7th note in the key of C major, is a B, right? And the 6th note in the key of C major, we'd go back a whole step in that case, right, to A. Right, that's the 6th note in the key of C major, just like if we were going up this way. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Right? We would essentially land on this same note, just an octave higher. So it's the same thing down here. So once again, if I go to this G chord, I have to play it major to fit in the key of C major, right? Because it's the fifth chord in the key of C, right? It's the fifth note in the key of C. So to play the corresponding chord for that fifth note, just like I said, the 1, 4, 5 is major, right? It would have to be major, right? The sixth note is A in the key of C, right? The sixth note in the key of C is A, right? So that A has to be minor, because I said the second, third, and sixth chord for the key are going to be minor, right? So that A has to be minor because it's the sixth chord, just corresponding with the sixth note in the key of C major, right? So that has to be minor, right? So then we're coming up here to the seventh chord, which is that B, and that B minor 7 flat 5. It's kind of a, it doesn't necessarily sound very pleasing in some respect, maybe like the other chords. And there's one of these notes that might be a little different on the bottom here, but generally speaking, these first three notes at least are the start of this chord. I think it might just be like that. Something. Let me see here. I have to derive it maybe a little bit. I don't play this chord very often, right? Most guitarists probably don't use this chord very often either. But it might fit into some scenarios, so it's not to say you would never use it. It's just, it doesn't seem to have the same pleasing tone that many of the other chords in the key will often have, like G major. Right, then back to C. Right. So I'm just playing chords that correspond, playing E minor, because E has to be played as a minor in the key of C major, right? It's a third chord. It's second, third, or sixth, right? It's the third, so it's E is going to be minor. I want to play it in the key of C major, right? It's just like an open E minor chord. If you're familiar with that, it's just a very simple chord. Right? So E minor. But if I'm going to play an F chord in the key of C once again, that's the fourth chord in the key of C. And what do we say the fourth chord is going to be? It's going to be major, right? Same thing with G, the fifth chord. Once again, the sixth chord, A, is going to be minor. Seventh chord is a minor 7 flat 5. If I'm correct, something like that. You can look into it if you want to play that chord more often for some reason, but it's not like it's a bad chord. It's just probably not going to fit into most songs that you'll learn or play most of the time. But getting back up here, we get back up to the first note again, or the eighth note of the sequence of the first. It's the completion of an octave. If we were starting from a C note, that theoretically we would be back here a little ways, just like this bar corresponds with this 12th fret, right? So every note we play open is on this 12th fret. It's just an octave higher, right? So E or E, A or A, D or D, right? You probably already know that, maybe you don't, but this is half of the string. You can also play a harmonic there, right? You can also do this harmonic by barely touching the strings and playing it. You can also do this right down here on the 7th fret, right? This is a third of the string. And then over here on the 5th fret, it's like a fourth of the string. So it gives you another harmonic. You can even cut it down further somewhere, like a fifth of the string. Won't be very. So you get a little harmonic right there. Maybe even a sixth. Be very light, but see, I can get a fifth, kind of a little bit. You can get a third. I mean a fourth, a third, a half, right? So anyway, that's just a little bit of thought on that, just harmonics, right? Maybe you're familiar with doing harmonics, different ways to do harmonics, but those are the main ways. Just to cut your string into equal parts, right? And play, and just barely put your finger above that fret, right on the fret itself. And right, so you can make harmonics. So anyway, that's just about that. But getting back to the idea of staying in the key, right? So you're playing these chords, the first, fourth, and fifth are going to be major variants. The third, second, third, and sixth are going to be minor variants. The seventh being a minor 7 flat 5 variant. But also you can move the notes around, right? So if we know the scale, the key of C right here, we play the C chord, we also play the Ionian mode. We can also move outside of that mode to play other notes that are still in the key of C, but they're in other positions on the fretboard, right? So just like I said, you can play C, D, E, or you can play C, D, E, right? Instead of C, D, E, F, G, I can go C, D, E, F, G, right? Same notes, it'll have a little bit different sound, different, patterns on the, give it a different feel, different ways. People play it certain ways because they like the voicing of it, but it could be played multiple ways because you can play the same notes by doing, that right there. But you can see how the guitar is connected. Each string is connected just like basically 5 frets away, except for between the G and the B. It's like, it's one less fret, I believe, right? So, but overall, you can see how this string is just running. It's really just running right down to the next string, right? And same thing with this, right? So, and the same thing with the next string, right? Now this next string down here, you see, this one's like a fret closer when we tune it, so it's just going to be 1 fret off, right? But basically the same concept, right? It's just continuing to the next string, right? So, on the same thing down. No, whoops. Right? So, we're just, instead of moving up one string, we're just kind of keeping it all going down the strings like this, running through a scale. Let's say we play this key of C, this C major chord, and we can move to other notes that are in the scale and kind of play variants off the C chord. Like, I know this note right down here is also in this C major scale. I recognize some of the other notes here. Maybe I want to play down there and play this, put my pinky down there and play that chord, or maybe I want to move the C down a fret, 1 fret, but I have to change the fingering position a little bit to do that because it's a little tricky. But play the C major 7 or the C minor, I'm sorry, the C7, just a C7 or a C minor 7. Right, there's different ways I can just play different notes from the key. Kind of jam in the key and play the chord like real quick and just go. You get the idea. Maybe I'm not doing anything great. You can, right? Right, so that's going to kind of correspond and go together. So, same thing with the next chord up here, this D minor, right? If you know the next mode, you know the notes that are around it, you can kind of, add in other notes, right? Same thing with the next chord. So, this is just a little lesson on, like I said, just deriving the chords from a key, and knowing whether they're major or minor, and then kind of, like I said, you want to really go back and learn your modes and scales so that you can, be a little more confident in finding a variant. But a lot of them will be common variants, like I said, like, a C7 or something, or a major 7. It's a pretty common variant of a chord. Just like a C down here, I can take that off and make it a C major 7. And I'm just taking this one C note and letting it go down to the 7th note in the key of C major, right? So it's just a C major 7, right? Because it's a C major chord with the 7th note from the major key, right? Not from a C minor key, but the C major key. So, yeah. Anyway, there's another C major 7 right here. Right. There's some other videos. You might see a video at the end of this one here which goes into some other concepts there, like the 4 different ways to make a major chord, right? The 4 major ways. And there's, different ways, all kinds of different ways. I'm just saying 4 ways using the top 2 strings, or these bottom strings, I should say. A lot of people like to say bottom because they're bassy, but, they're really kind of like physically on the top end of the guitar, of the neck, right? The top side of the neck. And but like I said, the 4 major ways to make a major chord, and then how to make minor chords from that. But like I said, maybe check out those other videos. I appreciate you listening to this one. I appreciate any likes, shares, or comments, or if you want to come back and maybe check me out again, I, of course, welcome you to subscribe. But until next time, we'll see you in the next video.